Okay, here we go. Welcome to another G4 Guitar Teacher 30-minute hangout. So in other words, we're going to start this in about 30 seconds, and then we're going to knock it off in exactly 30 minutes. And what happens is, in the first part of this presentation, the 15 to 20 minutes, I'm going to really hog the microphone, if you like, and give a presentation on the topic, and that's what I'll do in each and every case. The reason we're keeping it to 30 minutes is, research shows that our brains have what's known as cognitive overload, and what happens is if we take in too much information, after a while we start to switch off, we tune out. And that happens, they find that on average it happens at about the 15-minute mark. So this is why things like TED Talks are done for 18 minutes. So what I'm going to do here is try and keep it as close to the 15 minutes as I can, but I'll probably go a little bit over. So allowing for that sort of 15 to 20 minutes. Let's see how much we can get done. Today's topic is going to be 3 ways to avoid student dropouts. All right, so I'm going to give you I'm going to go into these 3 topics in depth, as much depth as I can, and it'll really nail down the areas that I think, the most important areas that you can use to avoid student dropouts. So number 1 is take responsibility, and this really is a big one, and it's one that I see, it's the reoccurring pattern, not just in teaching guitar. If you want to go to a life coach, the first thing they're going to tell you is take responsibility, stop blaming other people, stop blaming the world. The more that responsibility you take, then the more you're going to get control of your business and control of your life ultimately. So take responsibility. I'm going to give you an example of 2 teachers, and these are two real teachers that I've known over the years. I've sort of picked them out, and I'm going to use them as kind of examples of both sides of the story. And I'm not going to obviously use their real names, but let's just call them Bob and Jane. Now, in the case of Bob, and I'm going to sort of use some rough numbers. I won't give you exact numbers, but in the case of Bob, he was losing about 50% of his students in that kind of first 12 months of taking on any students. And in the case of Jane, who's the other example, she was only losing about 10%. Now, when I interviewed them, both of them pretty much said the same thing. They would say that their students were great, they were reliable, they paid on time, they turned up, they practiced, they were progressing well. So pretty well on every level, except for these dropout rates, they had pretty much the same story to tell. So what I did was looked at it a little bit closer and wanted to find out what the key difference was. So what I did was I posed a question. The first question was, which I posed to Bob, was, why do you think you're losing 50% of your intro students or students in that first 12 months? And his answer was quite simple. He said that that's about what you can expect, because only about 50% of students that you'll take on will really want to learn guitar, that are really serious and committed to learning guitar. Most of them will quit in usually the first 3 to 6 months is what he would estimate. So the other 50% were just students who just didn't have what it took to learn guitar. So it seemed like a fair statement to me. So I was really curious to see what Jane would have to say. So when I went to Jane, I asked her, why do you think you lost 10% of students, or only 10%? And Jane's answer, which was quite surprising, was that she said that she felt that she still needed to work on her teaching, that she hadn't quite mastered the game of teaching, and therefore she was losing around 10%, which was not what I was expecting. I was expecting her to say something like, 10%. Of course, you're not going to retain all your students. You're going to lose some, which is what I would have said. But she said, I need to improve my game to get that 90% up to 99% or even 100%. So 2 very different scenarios here between what's happening with Bob and what was happening with Jane. And really the conclusion that I drew from this was that it was about Jane taking responsibility. She was saying that the students are dropping out because of me, because I need to improve my game. Bob was saying that it wasn't me, that 50% of the students are just not committed to learning guitar. So he wasn't taking responsibility. Now, is Jane totally right? Is Bob totally right? In fact, neither of them are entirely right. Both of them are actually right in a sense. Some students, no matter what you do, no matter your best efforts, you probably won't turn into committed long-term guitar students. But if you take the assumption, which Jane has, that it comes back to her and her skill as a teacher, you're probably going to retain a lot more students, because you're constantly looking for what it is that you're missing. And while you constantly keep doing that, you're going to improve and improve and improve your game. And that's the way I look at it. I just assume it, whether it's right or not. I assume that everybody who drops out as a student, there was something that we could have done, something that we could have changed as teachers. So that really is the first point. Take responsibility. The more you do that, look at every single situation and try and bring it back to yourself as much as you can. Don't stress over it. Don't beat yourself up over it. It's not a thing to bring yourself down about. It's just a thing to look at it objectively and say, what could I have done differently or better or improve on? The second bit of advice I'm going to give you is prevention rather than cure. And again, this is a big one. All three of these, of course, are the big ones for me. But prevention rather than cure is something that I see as the big problem for a lot of teachers. 90% of the questions I get, again, a rough number, but the large majority of the questions I get are more about cures than prevention. And what do I mean by this? Well, let me use an example. It's a bit like, well, an example is a student a teacher who would come to me and say, I've got a student who just finished the intro. They said they're not continuing beyond the intro. They've told me they're too busy or they can't afford it or this or that or the other. They've got all these, whatever reasons that they can't continue on with learning guitar. So the result is they're dropping out. And so what do I do? They've come to me, what do I do? So this to me is what I call a Titanic scenario. It's a bit like being on the Titanic. It's starting to sink. You've hit the iceberg and you're saying, we need more lifeboats. What do? It's too late to be asking for lifeboats at that point in time. And that's what most teachers do. They actually ask at the time that the student's dropping out, not before. So the more questions you ask before, what can we do to prevent this? And you guys are obviously doing this because you're here. What can I do that will prevent these students from dropping out? Another analogy I use is the airline industry, where they do air crash investigations. And the idea of each air crash investigation is to find out what they can do and what they can learn from that accident that will stop planes crashing that same way in the future. And that's why today the chances of dying in a plane crash are dramatically small. We've had a bad year, I think, recently, or Malaysian Airlines has certainly had a bad year, but it's not the norm. Very rarely do planes go down today, but that wasn't always the case. Planes used to go down a lot more often 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, but they found out they did a lot of research on it. There's a couple of great books you can read that sort of explain all this, which I found fascinating. Things like, I think some of the Malcolm Gladwell books go into quite a bit of detail in it. So prevention rather than cure. So let me actually give you some real strategies that you can work with. Number one is to ask the question, and I've mentioned this before, what will you do when you quit? So if you ask your student, what are you going to do at the time you quit? What are you going to do when you want to quit? So by presenting this question and really being ensuring you get an answer. So don't be persistent with the question. Make sure your student actually responds with an answer. If they say something like, I won't want to quit, I'm really, which they often will say in the beginning, I'll never want to quit. I'm fully focused and this is what I want to do. Okay, but just if you do, what will you do? Let me play devil's advocate here and just if there's that off chance that you want to quit, what will you do? And what you want them to say is that I will give it another week or another month is even better. And that's what I get all of the students to say. And this became a real winner for me, because I would say, when you hit that point where you want to quit, can you promise me that you'll just give it another couple of weeks or give it another month? Can you do that for me? Oh, sure. And they would commit to it in the beginning because they're pumped up and excited. So when the time came to them saying, look, Dave, I think I'm going to have to quit for now because I've got this, that, or whatever the excuse, I said, hang on, let's go back to plan B. Remember what you said. You'd give it another month. Can you do that? Can you do that for me? Yes. Okay, I'll do it. I'll hang in there for another. And you'd be surprised how often that worked. And just by doing it, they often don't even pull that card because they realised that they've committed early on to a no-quit kind of policy. Now, you will occasionally get students who will say, look, I can't guarantee that. I don't know. When I feel like quitting, I'll probably, whatever. Occasionally get those students. So I knew from the very beginning this student was a problem. That was a kind of a different scenario, but I still was able to address the problem early. I was able to look at the situation and say, okay, if you feel that there's a chance, sometimes you get students who say to you, look, I'm just trying, I'm not really sure if I'm cut out for this, I'm not really sure if I want to do it. Is it for me? Do I have any musical sense or whatever? So they would come up with all these kind of stories and scenarios, and I would respond by saying, this is a problem already, because you're already fulfilling that possibility that you're going to quit. What you need to do, guitar is not about whether you can or cannot do it. Anyone can do it. It's about whether or not you're committed to doing it. So let's talk about that. So getting all this stuff out on the table early will dramatically reduce your chances of student dropouts. So that's the first strategy. The second strategy that I would talk about a lot is the actual habit forming. And a lot of people don't understand the science that's been done behind actually forming a habit. And done through the London College, they did quite an in-depth research project there that showed it takes about an average of 66 days to develop a habit. Now that's an average. It depends on how complex the habit is. Some habits can take up to 250 something days. Other habits can occur within a week or two. So again, it depends on the kind of habit that we're talking about. A habit of eating chocolate probably doesn't take that long, where a habit of eating and kind of living a very perfect healthy life probably takes a lot longer to establish. But what I found with guitar is that we have what I would label as habit muscles, and that is that if you get into the routine, let's say for a month, for 30 days of practicing, after that 30 days, if you stop for a week and come back again, it won't take 30 days to get to the same point again. It'll only take maybe a week or two to get back to that same point. So people, when you explain this to people and explain kind of the science behind habit, and a great book to read is The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, I think, and it'll give you kind of more of the science. And the more you can sort of explain this to people, because really what we're doing, we think that what we're doing is mostly showing people how to play a guitar, but they don't really need that from us. How to play a guitar is everywhere. It's all over the internet. It's all free. And that's why a lot of people don't go to teachers, because they think, what do I need a teacher for? I just want to know how to play guitar. I can find that anywhere. What they really need from you is to understand the science of learning and sticking and creating these habits and building it. And if you can explain this early and they understand that you really know this stuff, then they will have a lot more faith in you and stick with you, because they know that you understand human psychology and the way that we're going to respond in certain situations. So you're setting them up to win. And that's what I would say to them. I'm setting you up to succeed, and we need to do all these things right if we're going to get this, if it's going to happen for you. So that's the second strategy. The third strategy that I've got is to get them practicing from day one. Early wins are a big part of anything. People who have early wins, and for lack of a better example, gambling. People who walk into a casino for the first time, throw some money down on the table and win, especially if they win big, very easily get addicted to gambling. And gambling it's very scientific, the way that they actually set up gambling systems to get people hooked by giving them early wins and giving them things. And I think we spoke about this before in exams, where most of the exams around the world, music exams, are set up so the early grades are easy to get through. And I think it was David even who said that you can't fail the first exam in a certain exam. And that's pretty well, even though it's not always spoken, it's a pretty well unwritten rule that the first stage you really want people to win, to feel like that they're actually making ground. So if you can get them practicing straight away, really get them in that first week. So I really need you to practice this week every day. And you can even tell them that, getting this early momentum is really important, and say to parents as well, you need to get this early momentum. If you make excuses this week, then you're really gonna, find it harder the second week. So let's go straight into it, and that way they get that early win. Give them lots of praise for any little thing. And what it also does is it gives them that feeling of, I'm doing this, I'm actually committed to it. And even if they don't make any progress on the guitar, that doesn't matter. The fact that they've sat down every day for 30 minutes makes them feel that I'm doing something and I'm committed to this. So and it'll give you clear signs that they're on board, that they're listening to you. Okay, so moving right along, The third strategy that I'm going to give you, the third bit of advice, is number 3, connect and build trust. And this really is a big one. So get personal is my first tip here. So as far as when you're talking to students and meeting students, if it's clinical and cold and you don't take these opportunities to connect with them on a personal level, then you will find it a lot harder, and they will find it a lot easier to quit on you. Whereas if you get to know them personally, things like ask them questions about their family, do they have any pets? It doesn't have to necessarily be to do with guitar. You know, what school do you go to? What's your teacher at school like? You know, get to know, you know, how's grandma, etc., etc. An example that I like to use is there was a very popular show in Australia called Rove, and he actually ended up going and doing Rove in Hollywood, and he was on one of the channels in the US, very successful guy. But what he used to do at the end of every program was he would say, at the end, say hi to your mum for me. And really what that did is it made him feel personal to you as a viewer, even though you don't know him, but just by saying that, you think, well, the only people who actually know my mum would say such a comment. So psychologically, it makes you feel this is a nice guy. He actually cares about my mum. He's asking about my mum, even though I don't know him. But it has that effect. So if you can do things like that, if you've got a student and, you know, how's Rover, your dog, you know, you know, your neighbour, how's your grandma, you just get to know them. And I don't mean in an inauthentic way or a fake way. Get to know them because it matters. Understanding your students and knowing them personally and connecting with them is really important, especially as group teachers, because you don't get a lot of time for that personal connection. So what you want to try and do is take every little moment and really do it in the intro as well, because that's where you kind of build up that connection, and you can do it very quickly. And that really will stop a lot of these dropouts. Even if people are not feeling like they're making great progress in that first intro, the momentum will be there and the connection will be there with you. Second thing is to make them feel important. Do the small things. Think about, again, what matters to them. This really is a play off the first one, but you know, making them feel important might be things like remembering what kind of music they like. Don't run your groups and your teaching without knowing what everybody's into. So, you know, it can be a very inappropriate thing even. You can say the wrong thing. You can start talking about music that they have no connection with or they think is totally uncool. And if you don't talk about what they're into, you don't touch on what they're into, doesn't mean you have to teach the songs they're into or even teach the bands and music they're into. Just knowing what they're into makes them feel that you actually are thinking about them and you care about them. So number 2 is make them feel important. And the last one that I'm going to sort of wrap up on here is don't be too serious. Try and keep it a little bit fun. Look for opportunities to have a joke. Look at, you know, you don't need to be a comedian and you shouldn't be a comedian because you're not there to be a comedian. But look for opportunities to lighten it up. People, when they laugh, they relax. They're more likely to have fun. They're more likely to be in a better mood for learning, and that will it will also make up, especially in the group situation. This is something that I probably haven't pointed out before, but in a group situation, when you kind of create a bit of a more light-hearted situation, you're going to get the students connecting more easily, and when they start connecting, then the groups actually work a lot better. So just to wrap up on those 3, number 1 is take responsibility, number 2 is prevention rather than cure, and number 3 is connect and build the trust. So that's me. I'm done. We've covered what have I done it in? Under 20 minutes, which is good. So are there any questions? If you've got any questions, just throw it up.
Hi, David. I have a question.
Great.
For my last couple of dropouts, I've not really seen it coming. You know, it's kind of just they've cancelled the direct debit and that's been it really. They've not told me they've been quitting, or I've not seen it, you know, happen in advance. So I was unsure of how to deal with that really.
Okay, and that's a good one. The thing is about teaching is that as you get more and more experience and really analyze each situation, and this is going back to the analogy that I was using with you know, Bob and Jane in the beginning about, you know, Bob thinking the students were just dropping out because they just weren't interested in guitar, where Jane was taking it actually personally and thinking there was something that she needed to work on. So by doing that, you tend to look into it more, and you start looking for clues. You go back over thinking about what they did. Were they practicing? Were they, were they turning up on time? What was the dynamic between, say if there was a mother and a child? What was the dynamic there? Was there a bit of friction? Was mum not on board? Was there something going on behind the scenes? Maybe dad doesn't want to do guitar, or so. As you start to ask those questions and really investigate each situation, you do find more and more answers, and then you start to again bring those preventative kind of measures on board. Things like I would do was ask people in the beginning: is there anything you think that will get in the way of you learning guitar? Is there anything that you can think of coming up? And people would say things like, "Oh, well, we've actually got a holiday coming up in 6 weeks where we'll be away for a month. Is that a problem?" And they weren't going to tell me that until I asked, because I talk about consistency and how it's really important. And I'd say, okay, you got a holiday. Okay, it might be a problem, because of the fact that you're going to have done the intro, then you're going to not play guitar for 4 weeks, and then you're going to come back and start again. So, I would sort of work it out from there, see what we can do. But there are other scenarios where they might say, look, my mum and dad are divorced, and when I go to dad's, I can't take the guitar with me. Blah, 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 okay, so we need to work that one out. So when mum comes, is there any way that we can get a guitar over there for him to practice, maybe leave one at his dad's or something, whatever. So as you kind of get more and more into this, you start to find clues, and with those situations where they're dropping out, often there's nothing I can say without knowing more, and there's nothing, there's probably, one last thing I'll give on that is the example that that I think I've used before, but it was the fireman that was kind of went into there was a whole bunch of them anyway. The firemen, they went into this burning house, and they didn't know what was going on, but the fire chief just said to everybody, "Get out, get out, get out," and they all sort of looked at him like, "It's all right, chief, there's no problem," and the chief's like, "Get out now," and everybody ran out, and then the whole floor collapsed, and there was a massive fire under the floor, but they didn't know it. It was just the chief knew something wasn't right, and that was his years and years of experience. And that's you can read about it. It's in the Malcolm Gladwell's book Blink, and it was all about those instant moments. And people build up this all cases of pilots and people in the army and Marines and stuff who react in a split second, who just know the situation's not right, and that's kind of what you're looking for. You're kind of looking, but it doesn't just happen. It happens from years and years and years of training and experience and becoming aware of situations. So the more you analyze those, Dave, the less they'll happen, truly, and you'll find answers to them.
Okay, cheers.
Cool. Question? Anybody?
Yeah.
Any other?
I've got one.
Yep. Trevor, go.
Yeah. I mean, obviously you're always going to get some dropouts. Presumably it's unavoidable. I mean, do you have a rough sort of statistic or any kind of guide as to what you'd expect to get initially, and does that figure sort of decrease over time? Just as a sort of rough, kind of guide what to expect.
Yep. My statistics personally was that 97% of my students went past the intro, and then after a year, it was about 87%. 87% of my students stayed on beyond 12 months. So that shows you what is achievable and what I think any one of you can do. What I did, yes, it took quite a number of years of experience, and I still believe that score could have been improved. I don't really think that 97% could have been improved. I think the intros, it's probably about as good as it's going to get, but the 87% I think could be improved, and that's really kind of the top end. Now, it's a bit like saying how fast can you play on a guitar. Again, it comes down to how many years you've been practicing and what exercises you practice, and maybe a little bit of a natural ability there as well, as to how fast. So, that question would be a bit like a student saying, well, how fast does the average guitar player play? I would say, well, it depends on the guitar player. It depends on what they do, how long they've been playing, how much of it's a priority for them. So at this stage, and I understand the question, and it's a similar question to students who say, how long does it take to learn guitar? Well, the answer again is it depends on what you want to play, the kind of songs you want to play, etc., and of course how much you practice and the quality of your practice. So there are lots of factors involved. But as a minimum, you should be, at this point, for you guys who are just starting out, you should be converting 50% of your intro students. If you're converting less than that, then you really need to look deeply at what's going on. And that's why I'm here, and that's what G4 is about. It's not that you give up just because you're losing 50%, but if you are losing 50% or more, then let's have a look at it. That's of your intro. For those who for over a year, again, what you're trying to do of those who get past the intro, because obviously if you're only getting 50% coming past the intro, then the 50% that get past, you really want to keep 50% of them for a year. That's as a beginner point. That's really what I would expect from even the most average guitar teacher. And really what we want to do is build on that and get you up into these higher percentage rates. Does that help, Trevor?
Yeah, that's good. I mean, just as a rough guide, you kind of say like a year you'd have had 87%. How long would you normally expect to keep a student for, or is that another one of these how long's a bit of string kind of questions?
Yeah, look, it's not actually. It's a good question because it really depends on what you're offering. If you're offering a course, then you can see how long it's going to go for. So, I would say to a student, you could be with me for really about 5 years if we go right through the course, and you move at an average rate. But if you're progressive and learning quickly, then we can go through this in 2 years, the whole thing. And in Australia, what that meant was that there's 4 AMEB exams. And so the idea is to go through the G4 levels and then go through the exams. But then again, it also depends on the age of the child. A 5-year-old is going to be with you for a lot longer than a 15-year-old, because a 15-year-old already has motor skills and strength and coordination in place. So they actually learn faster. But the child who learns at a young age will often end up a much better player because the skills become more innate. So it is one of those questions where it depends on the age. But if I said to a junior student, of age 5, how long are you going to be with me? I would say you're probably going to be with me until you're about 14, so about 7 or 8 years. But if you're a teenager, you can knock this over between 2 and 5 years. So. All right. Yep. Okay. Cool. So I think Trevor's.
Yeah. Sorry. Thanks.
Okay. No worries. So we've got 2 more minutes. Does anyone else have a question? Got time for one more question. Yes, Ruby, go.
Just that's all really good stuff. Just in terms of some of my younger students, I have some very, very young ones, and I've found that it's probably more significant than with them to have that relationship with the mother or the father. And some of them I've found that just keeping that student on board, so I've really had to coach the parent from week to week about how to keep them practicing and how to keep them on track. And I've lost a few very young students really just because the parent didn't want to have to do the work essentially to get the student to practice.
Yeah, yeah, and it's one that I now am on the other side of the coin. Working with my daughter, who often doesn't want to practice, and sometimes I've just got to send her to a room and say, go to your room. If you don't want to practice, go to your room and come back when you do. And I think parents are afraid to do that. I think we're thinking that it should be fun and pleasurable, and that kids should just enjoy learning music. But it's a fallacy. It's something it's some dream that somebody thought up. That kids are just naturally going to pick up musical instruments and love learning them. They're going to go through stages. They're going to enjoy it sometimes, and sometimes they're not. It's like going to school. Sometimes they're going to want to study, and sometimes they're not. And some kids will take to it. There will be that small percentage of kids who just become obsessed, and they exist in every area. Kids that are obsessed by science, by reading, by exercise, You know, I remember reading about Tiger Woods and how he was just fanatical about playing golf, and you know, some kids really do take to it, but they're the rare exception. They're not the norm. It takes a lot of persistence from a parent, and generally behind every child that is a, you know, so-called prodigy, there is a very, very strong parent behind them who's running the show and guiding them through to success. It doesn't just happen naturally. You know, the book Bounce, which is fantastic for this, talks about this situation, about all these parents who were behind, you know, the Williams sisters with tennis. You know, the father had already thought of them as being champions before they were even born. You know, Tiger Woods' father was the guy behind Tiger Woods, even though he took to it, still behind it. Mozart, his father Leopold, who was the you know, one of the leading music teachers in Europe at the time. So there is a backstory, and there's a backstory of parents, and so I think parents just need to understand this, and I used to explain it to them that it's not some magic. It's not that your kid is born with a love of music or not. You know, it's something that you will have to guide them through, and it's a gift, and it's something that if you persist with, they will get to an age where they'll really love doing it, and that they will become they will be thankful for it. It's not something that they go, I don't know anyone who plays guitar who says, my parents forced me to play it, now I hate them and I hate the guitar. I haven't met that person. They may be out there, and probably there is. But the relationship, what I always say, it's not about the guitar. It was about the relationship and the way the parent went about it. It's actually usually something else, but they're using it as an excuse. I was forced to learn music, and now I hate it because of my parents. No, what happened is you had a bad relationship with your parents. You hate your parents, but you're just sort of throwing music in the middle of it because that was the kind of stick that they used to wield. So, with children need to have, you know, those kind of, without being, you know, I don't believe in hitting children. I don't believe in any kind of mental kind of, you know, making children feel guilty or you know, demoralizing them or doing any of that kind of thing. I'm very, you know, very much for, you know, positive parenting. But I understand that you also need to have boundaries for children, and if you want them to learn something and do something that's a challenge for them, you need to really step up, and you need to say, well, you know, I'm prepared to do what needs to be done to get this done. So it is a hard sell sometimes, because different people have different sort of places, and not everyone is going to be easily convinced. But parents, I found that most parents get it. They see it. And they understand that, you know, their kids are not going to clean their teeth unless they get them to do, and they're not going to go to bed on time, and then they're going to watch TV if they get the chance, and eat pizzas and all the rest of it. So we're done. We're on the 30 minutes, so we're done. If any of you guys want to post some questions on, I'll put this up on Facebook to review. The idea is, like I said, is keep these nice and short, and hopefully you guys got a lot out of it, and yeah, we can keep the conversation going on Facebook. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, David. Cheers. Bye-bye.
See you guys. Bye-bye.